It's interesting you made a comment about, having those calls once a month. I think you said Andrea Lake was her name. Is that
That's correct.
Yeah. And, I think about having a call, and there's a quote that I often use. It's not my quote. I don't know whose it is. I've never been able to find it. I don't even know how I came up with it or where it came from. I just can't take ownership of it, which is confidence is rarely owned. It's almost always borrowed. And, to your point is that, getting on that call and having those conversations is what gave you the confidence, because she was, like you say, validating the thought process, validating the direction that you were going, and or giving you tweaks and guidance along the way. I'm fascinated as well just by the individuals like yourself who've really accomplished a lot along the way, and at a young age seem to find a path, a direction. And although that direction might have changed at some point, and to that end, was there a fork in the road for you, like along the way, where I understand that you were doing the fighting thing, you were doing the poker thing. Was there literally a fork in the road, a moment in time where you went, shit, I got to make this call, and or an opportunity showed up and you went, I'm going that way? You probably have a couple of fork in the road moments by the sounds of it, but was there one that stood out for you?
There have been several. And if I were to go back in time, more often than not, anytime I decided to sell a company, there was some sort of fork in the road moment. Anytime I decided to move to a new city or something like that, there was something. But the one that stands out the most for me, I would say at the end of the day, was after I started my first company, and I wasn't really taking it incredibly seriously. I was kind of starting it for vanity reasons at the time. And I'd heard that it was the thing to do to diversify your income streams from just online poker and things like that, and make it less stressful, so you're comfortable taking bigger risks and so forth. And I had just done a triathlon that day. I was kind of going from fighting to triathlons and ultra marathons and things like that at the time. And it was one of those days where Murphy's Law was definitely in effect. Everything that could have gone wrong went wrong. I got goggles broke in the lake, 2 flat tires on the bike. It was just kind of a nightmare situation that day. So I was just emotionally spent. Got to the parking lot. My girlfriend broke up with me over a text message. So I was just not in a good mental place that day. And a friend of mine, I was staying at his apartment for the evening because I was in a different city for the event. And he said, look, let's go out. And I think I was 20, 21 years old. And he said, let's go out and get some beers and some food, and you're going to forget about all this stuff, and it's going to be a fun night. Okay. So I go down to get a change of clothes through his parking garage, and it's 1 p.m. on a Sunday afternoon in Iowa City, Iowa. It's not exactly crime central. But I walked back through the parking garage, and there was a gentleman that walked up to me and asked me to help him get something out of his car. And as a Midwestern people pleaser, of course, I said yes, and walked up to an empty parking stall, turned around, and he basically had a little bit of a different look on his face. He told me to, give me, or he wanted me to give him my wallet and my keys. And when I realized that he wasn't joking, it was the first and likely only time since in my life that I really just did not feel like myself in that moment. Usually I have quite a bit of emotional control. But I was, at the time I was still fighting professionally, and,
trained fighter.
Yeah. And so I was also training with the UNI wrestling team for a little while for a fight I was going to have in Seattle, which I didn't end up having because of exactly what happened next. I shot in and picked him up for what in wrestling they call a blast double, just a takedown, and picked him up, dumped him on the ground, and felt a pinch in my thigh. And I looked down, and there was a 5-inch blade sticking out of my body. There was a big slash across, like my shirt was wide open, and a big cut down my chest, and the blade was stuck in my thigh. And I knew in that moment, I was in my first master's degree was in exercise physiology and biomechanics. I knew, I was an anatomy student, and I knew that it was not in a good spot. So when I saw that, I started yelling. I don't think that particular gentleman meant to stab me. I think that when I dumped him on the ground, I almost landed on the knife. in a way. And I think that that was what he was trying to use to get into people's cars, because it wasn't your normal like knife that you would use to like what I would imagine in movies you see when people stab other people. It was more one of those craftsman multi-tool fold out blades with pliers and so forth. But it was still a 5-inch knife sticking out of my thigh. So I'm sitting there in the parking garage, and I have a pretty bad feeling that if I move this blade, I'm probably going to bleed out because it's pretty close to my femoral artery. And so I did what anybody would do in that moment. I called my buddy upstairs rather than 911. He thought I was kidding. I came down and realized that I wasn't. So he calls 911. They send one police officer to arrest the prank callers. And when they see that it's a real call, they call an ambulance, they load me in, and I'm sitting there in the emergency room with a knife sticking out of my thigh for about 4 hours because they did not want to remove it based on the placement of the blade. And eventually they did. And the person that had taken the X-ray at the time showed me how close the blade was to the femoral artery, and it was probably less than a millimeter. And that's why they had to be so close. And I mean, at the time when I came in there, they had basically told me, like they were going to put me on some drugs to keep me calm and things like that. And I was flying high, right? I was not a drug or substance guy at all, but I could see in that moment why people got addicted to those because it was awesome. And and when she said what she said, it didn't register for me for that reason. But she said, just a quick little mention. Looks like you're still here for a reason. You better figure out what that is. And I remembered that, and the next day it was just a different version of myself had woken up because I recognized that just 1 millimeter to like one side or one maybe little twist of the blade, and I could have been dead that day. And so that I would say was the biggest fork in the road. I had never been outside of Iowa before at that point in my life. I had never really done anything outside of seeking external validation from, women or from other men or anything like that. I had bought fully into the hyper masculine culture that I was living in. And, that day I made more changes in my life than I'd ever made beforehand or since, and I really went all in on trying to become an entrepreneur, and um, moved to Thailand 3 weeks later after I was able to actually walk and function again. And since then, I've just basically never wanted to waste another moment of my life because, every single moment I've gotten after that, I've felt is a pretty significant gift.
Yeah, I can totally, great story, by the way. I can really see where that would have been a big fork in the road. And it was, it played into a question that I was thinking, which is, what drives you, what drove you, and, so that particular story was, okay, a fork in the road where all of a sudden you realized life could be short, and, entrepreneurship was the thing that you wanted to do. But even as you sit today, and I know even before we got on the call, we talked about what you would like to see out of this, and you're pretty straightforward. I just want to be a contribution. I just want to, share what I know, and maybe some things that your listeners might enjoy and appreciate. And so, but when you're looking as an entrepreneur and as a business owner, what drove you, or what drives you to this day? What keeps you going? What's kind of your goal? And I don't want to use the word purpose, but for lack of better language right now, uh, do you have that mission in mind, that purpose that you get up and go, that's where I'm heading? That's what I want.
What a great question. So I typically like to answer this one in a couple different ways. And the first way is I think the vast majority of humanity are blessed with the satisfaction that comes from living a simple, smooth life. I am not one of those people. I could not, I know myself well enough that that would never be something that I would be happy with. My parents were, the vast majority of my family are, a lot of people I grew up with are. And I think that that's incredible. If you can if you can feel fulfillment, if you can feel a sense of purpose and excitement for every day by living a simple, straightforward life, that's awesome, and you absolutely should, and you should be very grateful that that's your outlook on this world. For me, the blessing and potentially, and through some lenses, the curse that I have is if I'm not doing something that doesn't have what I feel is a clear path to changing the course of human history in some significant way, I feel like I'm wasting my time. So it's not necessarily me trying to reach for a certain income threshold or something like that. It's I don't have very expensive tastes, or anything like that. I like nice views. That's why I live where I live. I'm not a car guy. I don't have lavish displays of wealth or anything like that. I don't jet set around the world. I'm kind of a homebody. I just like to build things at the end of the day. I like to build things that feel like they matter to people who are experiencing problems that they want to solve and can't. And the feeling that I get, for example, when I mentor the entrepreneurs coming out of the big accelerator programs, many of whom are building technologies that, if they catch on, could absolutely change the world. There's nothing more fulfilling to me than saying something to a founder that I feel is second nature for me at this point, based on how many situations I've seen, and seeing how much that changes their outlook on life and their business, the problem they're trying to solve, just in that instant. And that, I would say, is the thing that informs the path that I have been taking, recently and moving forward.